bearded goat. I'm Aaron.
What's this smug look on your face? I'm Chris.
What do you mean, what smug look?
I feel like you think you're about to say something really funny.
I was actually thinking about what am I going to say? That's what I was really thinking.
Tell me about your journeys. What are we talking about today?
Oh, well, we're talking about the education of Ernest T. Bass. And I sent you a video from the 80s of a song by Ray Stevens called It's Me Again, Margaret. Did you get a chance to watch it?
I did, and I almost quit this podcast because you made me watch it.
Why did you quit it?
It was terrible. I loathed watching it.
Is it because they make stalking seem kind of funny, or did you just find the video and the song kind of annoying?
Very annoying, low production value, something that should have been buried in Y2K and never to return.
I see. Well, see, here's the thing. When I was a little kid, we all loved Ray Stevens. We thought Ray Stevens was so funny. I saw
your Weird Al?
No, I had Weird Al too. Ray Stevens was just, he sang songs like The Streak, It's Me Again, Margaret, a number of others. I'm blanking. Like there's one called the Mississippi Squirrel Revival. I think that's how the name of the song. But he was the first concert I ever went and saw at Dollywood in 1988.
Nice.
And he was, I mean, when you're 9 years old and you got Ray Stevens doing things like telling jokes like, was going to do a pirate song, but Captain Hook died today. Jock itch. You know, you're 9 years old, you think something like that's just hilarious. Or he's like 10 minutes into the concert and he walks off. He's like, y'all have been great. And he leaves.
I like that joke. That's good.
Out.
That's
you
good.
Like that joke? Yeah, you don't like the Captain Hook joke's actually pretty lame. But anyway, when you're 9, he's just hilarious. But as I was watching Ernest T. Bass in this episode, I kind of wondered if Ray Stevens just said, when I do It's Me Again, Margaret, I'm just going to basically be Ernest T. Bass.
I did. So I assumed that there was some linkage. You weren't just committing a microaggression against me.
I mean, let me videos that I think you're going to hate. Watch this. No, it's not like I sent you Faces of Death, but I did just send you this. But that was my question. Did you?
The reason I say that is because, I feel like I was being a witness being led, but I did totally see the similarities.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess one could ask Ray Stevens, but anyway, it was just something that jumped out to me.
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, thank you for continuing to open up my mind to the great canon of the 80s. And that's all I have to say.
So, what'd you think of this episode?
Ernest T is not quite for me, if you will. But he brings a good energy to the show, which I'm all for. And so that was fine. I thought, an interesting dilemma. I thought we go back to we repeated a trope from 3 episodes ago at the end of this related to Andy's relationship with Helen, so it was fun to watch. I don't think it was a legendary episode.
I agree with you. It is a fan favorite for a lot of folks, but not me.
Yeah, I think people are just happy to see Ernest T come back, right? Like if Otis, when Otis comes back, people are going to be lining the streets,
I don't really want to speak disparagingly of Ernest T. Bass because we joke about Aunt Beef fans being militant. Ernest T. Bass fans, I don't know what those folks will do.
They throw rocks at windows for sure.
They throw rocks at windows and they fight. And, they do all kinds of crazy things.
Zigzag.
I mean, we'll find out on social media, with the Ernest T. Bass contingent. So you want to dive in?
Let's dive in.
So we open at the jail with Barney stress about what they're going to eat for lunch. And Andy suggests the diner, but Barney says the special is chicken wings, rice, and vegetables. And they skimp on the chicken, or as Barney puts it, gives you 2 wings and usually from a chicken who's done a lot of flying. And so Andy says,
real leathery.
Yeah. And Andy says, well, we don't have to eat the special, which I guess is news to Barney, but he agrees and they decide they're going to go to the diner. But just then they hear a window break and they know Ernest T. Bass is back in town. And he comes in and he says he's going to pay for the window. And it turns out he's brought a whole bag of rocks. And after
a nice bag. I thought it was a nice bag.
Oh, lovely bag. Yeah.
They also looked like metamorphic rocks.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it looked like what Andy Dufresne in the Shawshank Redemption had been molding these rocks to have them look perfect.
Yeah, beautifully done.
Beautifully done. And it turns out After a little fuss, Ernest T gets a little sad and says he needs to discuss his plight, or as he says, what, plat?
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah.
mean, I got to be honest. I pick up like every other word that he says. It is not super clear to me, and it makes sense why he has to go back to school a little bit.
Well, I'll help
But
you
he
out.
probably said plat, and I was like, well, I don't know what this means.
He meant plight. And it turns out he proposed to Ramona, who he calls Romina, but she turned him down. This is the girl that he was.
Oh, he wasn't in
wild.
Romania? I thought he was in Bucharest. Then I had this whole other backstory.
You after his geography debacle, you think he's been to Romania? So this is the girl from My Fair Ernest T. Bass, the one who just is smitten with him, and they run all over the place at the end of the end of the show. But she says he needs to learn how to read and write. And through this whole process, Barney keeps asking, what about the rocks? And Ernest T says he wants to take a week to get educated. If only it works that way. And Andy says it will take a little longer than that.
He needs to do a full immersion.
Yeah. Well, it's a lifetime effort. That's education. Some people say it stops at a certain point in school. And for them, maybe it does.
This episode is brought to you by Lifetime Learning by Sylvan Learning Center.
Yeah, it's a lifetime, but it's a lifetime effort for a lot of people.
It is. I'm still learning today.
Yes, you are. As am I.
Oh, what a guy.
Yeah. So Ernest T then says if he doesn't get some help, he's going to use the rocks to break windows. And Andy finally agrees to help him. And
feels like he's really forcing his hand there, though.
Yeah, it does. And actually, he's going to have Helen help him. And so we cut to Helen teaching the class with Ernest T, and he keeps interrupting. She's asking the class to break down a sentence with the word possum in, like subject, verb, whatnot. But all Ernest T wants to do is talk about how you get possums. And the kids
you find a guy who's got dirt under his fingers. Wait, yeah. I had one thought before this. When Andy goes up to Helen and says, I want you to teach Ernest T. I like how the speed at which and authority over who's in her class is amazing. She's like, yes, I'll talk to the principal. He can come this afternoon. Can you imagine like the hullabaloo that would happen with people coming up? It would be a whole thing at the school board if you had an adult in a fourth grade elementary school class.
Well, you think about it. They always do this in pop culture. I don't know if you remember the movie Billy Madison.
I do. Beautiful movie.
Yes. Well, I don't know if I'd call it beautiful, but it has its moments. And he ends up in, he has to go back to grade school. But I think they have to pay a bunch of money for him to be able to do that.
I think so too.
Mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah. There would definitely be some angry parents involved today if Ernest T. Bass was in their class.
Yeah.
So the kids are finding it pretty funny, and that's just not good. And later, Ernest T tells Andy how he doesn't like Helen and that she ignored his knowledge, even though he lived with a possum and a raccoon for 6 months. This is my
favorite part of the whole episode. Yeah.
And we never really understand how this happened, but it is kind of interesting.
It's where he learned to wash his food, which is disgusting.
Yeah.
And then the other piece, I have a friend who hails himself as being quite intelligent. The jury's still out on that a touch. But one of the things he learned about 2 years ago that it wasn't possum, P-O-S-S, it's opossum.
Yeah.
And that I was reminded of that because there's no way Ernest is saying that. And Andy's definitely just talking about possums.
Yeah, I know the correct term is opossum. I still say possum.
Do you think that possums, I'm just going to say possum too because we're doing it, possums and raccoons live in harmonious discord?
I don't know. I don't really know what the possums and the raccoons do. Raccoons definitely are animals you don't really want to tangle with. So I don't know if they just kind of keep to themselves.
This feels like Ernest T. the raccoon and the possum were a cast of bandits that rode around for a bit.
They definitely three wily wild critters. I'm putting Ernest T. Bass in that category too, that you don't want to mess with.
Yep, I agree.
So Opie comes down with his first grade reader to help teach Ernest T. to read. And Ernest T. starts reading the words, and it is clear that he has learned to read by reading signs. But when Andy tries to help him form a sentence, it's just a hodgepodge of signs. It's kind of weird because it's kind of like he can say sentences.
Yeah, and I should have responded. So I was struggling with this of like the hunting thing. It's like he's looking at pictures, but he doesn't actually know the sounds that come from it. So you get a little bit out of that when he's like hunt, hunt, and it's more of an onomatopoeia than anything. But it's a fun gag. It's like what words open, close. Like what's that for? From the barbershop. That is a little bit of how kids do learn how to read.
That is fair, yeah. So basically, at the next day, Ernest T comes into the school wanting to say a sentence, but it is arithmetic time. So she doesn't want him to do a sentence. And then Helen calls Opie up to do his multiplication tables with the nines. Opie does a couple, and then Ernest T runs up and takes the chalk because he wants to do his own thing. And he won't give it back, and Helen gets mad and wraps his wrist with a ruler.
He's never done this with a student before.
I thought that was pretty funny. I mean, you're finally getting to see a little bit of Helen Crump's. You don't really want to make Helen mad. That's what we used to call her, actually, Helen Frump. You don't want to make Helen mad.
No.
And then Ernest T immediately tells her that he loves her as we go to commercial.
Boys fall fast in this show.
They do fall fast for Helen Crump. This episode was produced by Pod Machine. They do great podcasts at a great rate. Go to podmachine.com to learn more and enter Loaded Goat at checkout for a 10% discount. After the break, Ernest T throws a rock in Helen's window saying he loves her.
Classic. This is his move. This is how we first came onto the show, right? He was standing outside of the family. Who are they?
I mean, he's been throwing with the Darlings when he's throwing rocks at the Darlings. Yeah. And it's you're just kind of like, oh man, this is not the way to go about it. But obviously, it's Ernest T. Bass, so he's just doing his thing. Andy pulls up with the siren blaring and arrests Ernest T. And at the school,
is about the fastest, most timely response time I think we've seen in Mayberry.
Well, when your girlfriend calls and says someone's harassing her and throwing rocks through her window,
that makes sense.
You're probably going to get there with some gusto.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. At school the next day, Barney and Andy are discussing the issue with Helen, and she's obviously not happy with the situation and steps out. Barney offers to take Ernest T out back of the jail and kick him around a bit, and Andy says he'd kill you. I mean, he just says it like, he'd kill you. And you're like, yeah, you would. I wouldn't want to. I don't think Andy would want to tangle with Ernest T. Bass.
No, I mean, he trained with a raccoon.
I mean,
he scrapes.
You have no idea what this guy is going to do. I mean, he is not somebody
catch an infectious disease.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching a thing there's a wrestler. So I don't know if you have ever watched the program on Vice called Dark Side of the Ring.
No, I've missed it. I keep meaning to tune into it, but no, I just haven't.
Well, it's all about these crazy stories from wrestling, just the wrestling world. And the more I watch the show, I'm like, man, that pro wrestling, it's maybe a sleazy business. And, and so I'm watching it though. And they did this one on Abdullah the Butcher. And his whole thing was just straight up violence and bleeding in the ring. He bled every match. He's bald and he has got divots in his forehead from all the times he did blading on there. And he would do all kinds of things in the ring. And he actually had like what they would call gig blades, where you actually cut yourself so you can bleed in the ring. He had them on every finger on one of his hands.
To make the other person bleed or himself?
To make himself bleed and also make the other person bleed too.
Oh, wow.
Not something I'd want to do. But I would basically say tangling with Ernest T. Bass would be about as smart as getting in the ring with Abdullah the Butcher.
Yeah, I would agree.
And unless you're just huge and you're able to pin him down, he's going to mess you up.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to pin down someone that's so scrappy.
Yeah. So Andy then points out that he waited, Ernest T, until she hit him with a ruler before he fell in love with her. Well, then Barney, psychologist extraordinaire, then says he loves her like a mother. Sigmund Freud wrote a lot about that. Which
this is probably a little timely. I don't know. This is fun.
It is fun. It's actually, I mean, it actually goes into a little bit of psychology. I mean, of how Ernest T probably does see the world without getting too insane. And Andy agrees, but they don't know how they're going to get through to Ernest T. Andy then, when he finds Ernest T, asks him if his mother ever hit him, and he says she did. And then he explains to Ernest T that Helen is his mother figure, and Ernest T's like, "Oh wow, that cleared." Well,
didn't he say something like, "She hit me. What a wonderful woman."
Yeah, or something like that. I mean, Ernest T was. I mean, I'm always just curious, what kind of discipline when Ernest T. Bassett experienced growing up? Because he's still pretty wild. I don't even know what kind of parenting he had.
Yeah, I think he had a lot of childhood trauma and then lived with the animals like Mowgli for a while, and then eventually found himself thrust back into culture as, the suburban revolution took part in the 50s and people started expanding out into the woods.
That's a deeper thought. I've always just assumed they didn't really spend a whole lot of time parenting them. That's what my assumption was. Yeah, that's possible too. Yeah. So Ernest T says that cleared things up, and he asks Andy if he wants to be his brother figure, so I don't think Ernest T got the point. In town, Ernest T sees Helen coming out of the grocery store and tries to carry her groceries. And she runs up to Andy, who's sitting next to old man Schwamp. And then Ernest T jumps on Andy's back, saying he's trying to protect his mother figure. So Everett Greenbaum, who co-wrote the script with Jim Fritzell, says Mr. Schwamp was not scripted, and they just figured the guy who played him probably could use a day's pay, so the crew put him in.
Oh, really?
That's fun. So have I told you this? No one knows who the actor playing Mr. Schwamp is.
Really?
There's no record of it. Or if there was, it's long gone, and none of the actors who were asked about this can remember who he is.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. And it's actually an interesting twist in the movie Mayberry Man, not to go spoilers, but they do a shout out to old man Schwamp.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's one of the best tidbits you've had in a while.
Thank you. I thought I've had some other good ones, but thanks.
You've had other good ones, but just not in a while,
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fine. In the jail, Barney keeps offering to beat Ernest T up, and both Andy and Helen finally say he'd kill you, which is true. And Andy agrees to basically do what a lot of school systems in America are accused of doing, and just basically pass Ernest T through and get without really having him meet requirements.
Worked for me.
I'm joking here, but he said they're going to give him a fast education. And then he goes in to take a slapdash test where he really doesn't do much. And he gets a diploma that says he knows the boundaries of the United States, some arithmetic, and can read and write a little bit. I'm sure this is going to be all Romina needs.
Yeah, I mean, I actually would suppose that Romania just wanted him to try.
Getting Ernest T to, I'm sure she's got to look at this guy and say, I'm dating this man. He's kind of nuts. He has no prospects. He's got a hair-triggered temper.
But a nice neck.
And he followed up with really bouts of emotion. He goes from extreme happiness to sadness to anger. So he could very well suffer from mental illness. I don't really want to cast aspersions and say Ernest T. Bass may suffer from mental illness, but Ramona might think that.
I could see them having a complex relationship.
Yeah. And so yeah, I don't know. But yes, I think at the very least he needs to apply himself. I'm going to tell you, spoiler alert, Ernest T. Bass never settles down.
Oh, poor Romania.
I think she's probably dodged a bullet.
Probably.
I mean, I see her ending up with somebody more like BJ on The Righteous Gemstones.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So he says he's going to take the diploma to Ramona. He then gets choked up and says he is so proud. He thanks everyone, but most of all, he thanks his mother figure, Helen. Ernest T leaves, and Barney gets weepy as we go to commercial.
Beautiful.
And in the epilogue, Barney is once again trying to figure out where they're going to go for lunch. It looks like they've settled on going to the diner. They both think everything worked out with Ernest T and Ramona. And then a rock breaks a window. Barney says, 5 minutes behind the barn. And Andy says, he'd kill you as we close.
I like it. I mean, they had some good repetition in this episode.
Yeah.
Nothing groundbreaking.
I will also agree with you. I'm not anti Ernest T. Bass, but I'm not. It's not one of my favorite episodes when he shows up, and I feel kind of like, and maybe I'm wrong about this. They spend a little less in the few color episodes he's in. They spend a little less time appeasing him and just tricking him, and is what they do. And I mean, that's which I think is probably better, because there's eventually only so much placating you can do with Ernest T. Bass.
Yeah. Yep.
I think the best Ernest T. Bass episode, in my opinion, maybe the Darling episode next to the Darling episode is one where Ernest T. Bass and Malcolm Merriweather meet. That's a pretty funny episode. Yeah.
All right.
So how many whistles would you give this?
6.
That's kind of where I'm at too.
Settle at 6.
Yeah, that's I'm glad we're on the same page.
Me too.
Any final thoughts?
I look forward to seeing if you like the Barbie movie. I know that's kind of upcoming in your life, and I look forward to talking about that in the future.
Yeah, no, I'm going to see that tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that. And then maybe next week I'm going to go see Oppenheimer.
Wonderful.
Not doing that thing that the kids are doing of going to see both in the same day. That sounds a little heavy.
What are we on Adderall? No way.
I mean, I feel like that's a lot of time at the cinema.
It is.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening, folks. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you think about it, subscribe. Next week, we'll do Aunt Bee's Romance.
Ooh, all right. I bet she gets swindled.
Until then, Christopher, do you want to be my brother figure?
No, I want to be your mom.